I just wanted to start with a small intro, which is we're in a perhaps challenging transition in science. Research is proliferating, but the ability to consume it all is dwindling. Social psychology, neuroscience, general linear modeling, programming, these are the basics of our training, but now so too are machine learning, multi-level modeling, graph theory, website design, tweeting. And since the brain is a common currency for so much of what we do in different fields, you can't just get away with knowing your circumscribed area of research. You have to know something about memory and attention and perception. So there is a danger in being short-sighted. To keep pace, we often focus on articles that were published in the past year, month, or even on bioRxiv, and so our perspective naturally narrows. As researchers, we might reinvent the wheel for what is considered to be cutting edge is often kind of lost when we don't necessarily have a strong enough background in psychological theory. As reviewers, we often focus on low-hanging fruit and might underappreciate innovative scholarship in the articles that we review. And as young mentors, we may not always know what the best advice is to give to our mentees. So the purpose of this session is simply enough to spend a few minutes to gain some perspective from someone who has a much larger field of view than many of us, Chuck Carver. So Chuck Carver is a distinguished professor of psychology at University of Miami. He led an illustrious career and was a recipient of the APA Award for Distinguished Scientific Contributions. As just one mark of his scholarly achievement, he's been cited over 100,000 times, which is an achievement very, very few people reach. My own first encounter with Chuck was in 1999 when I took Neil McRae's social cognition course at University of Bristol, in which he highlighted the landmark work by Carver and Shire on automaticity and control. And in this work, it integrated research in social and personality psychology by Duvall and Wickland on objective self-awareness, which describes how people focus their attention on the self and evaluate the self with respect to social expectations and norms. And Chuck integrated that with cybernetic models by Miller, Galanter, and Pribram, such as the TOTE model, the test, operate, test, exit, to develop a novel hierarchical control system for self-regulation. So Chuck's research is foundational for so much of what we do as social neuroscientists. Pretty much anyone who studies self-control or self-regulation, behavioral inhibition, behavioral activation, or approach and avoid motivation, emotion regulation and coping, positive affect and optimism, much of this work is built upon research that Chuck has done. And his research is prolific. Even in the past few years, he's been publishing a lot more on serotonin and personality theory as it relates to psychopathology too. So why me? I'm not totally sure why Lucina and Aaron chose me to do this or asked me to, but I think I have an idea. It was because years ago I met Chuck in person, and for me it was like meeting a celebrity. And I asked him if he would take a selfie with me, which he did. I'd asked to put it on the slide, but I don't want to wait for the slide to show up. And I also don't want to increase any of Chuck's own objective self-awareness. So moving on, it is truly an honor to have you here with us. So if we could all just give a quick round of applause to Chuck.
Thank you.
Okay, so
fire away. Before you fire away, I'd like to thank Lucina and Aaron for involving me in the meeting. It's very nice of you to do that. I realize you did that because I was convenient, but that's, you know.
Okay, so so Game of Thrones, season 6. Just kidding, all right. So starting with your work, although you've had a pretty prolific track record, I heard someone once say that your intellectual career has largely...
You read this, you didn't hear this.
I read this, that's true, I read this. That your intellectual career has consisted largely of recognizing useful ideas that had been put forward by other people, changing their form a little bit here in one direction or another, and sometimes bringing some disparate ideas together, and then harping on them endlessly until the broader field noticed them too. So that someone was you. And why would you say that about your own trajectory?
Because it's true. I don't know. I was thinking about this driving over here. I think that most of us are less creative than we portray ourselves as being sometimes. And creativity, we all understand this at some level, that creativity is partly about putting together things that you happen to be familiar with that don't necessarily have anything to do with each other in your mind until you go, oh, well, look, this is very much like this. This is very much like this. Or this is a useful concept, but it would benefit from the piece that I'm picking up from over here in a different area. And I can literally, there would probably be, maybe even in this audience, some people who would say, well, you're just not very creative. But I could literally go through about 75% of my career's interests and tell you, this is not my creation. This is not something I invented. This is something that I picked up from somebody else, and here's how we changed it. Here's how we fussed with it. I first became interested in a research topic in graduate school when I became familiar with Duval and Wickland's self-awareness theory, and at the same time, roughly the same time, was exposed to control theory from Miller, Galanter, and Pribram, and other sources. Well, I certainly didn't invent control theory, and there are people out there who would say, I don't know shit about control theory, and I always use it wrong. But what struck me at the time was Duval and Wickland's theory. This goes back a long time. It was framed as a drive theory. Now, I don't know whether any of you can remember drive theories or not, but drive theories are kind of predicated at their core on the idea that people do things because they are in aversive states. And you don't really do anything unless you're in an aversive state, and you act to escape from the aversiveness. And because the theory was framed that way, it was framed in such a way as to say, when people are attentive to themselves, it creates an aversive drive state that they try to relieve by behaving in a fashion that reduces any sense discrepancies. Well, I've never been comfortable with the idea of drive theories, and the idea that you could talk about these things just in terms of the regulation of self-regulating systems was very appealing to me. So I patched that onto the side of Duval and Wickland's theory and screamed about that for 12 years. As I say, even the idea of hierarchicality of goal systems, which we sometimes are credited with, is not mine. It's not ours. It stems in large measure from the work of William Powers, a guy who's not even a psychologist or a neuroscientist. He was an engineer, but he built an edifice of various layers of control that was useful. And I could do that pretty much with every piece of what I've been interested in my career. I think that we sometimes get into a trap of requiring to ourselves that we be inventive, creative, that we come up with something that's never been thought of in the history of science before. Come on, that's not really necessary to be doing interesting or even important work. Let your mind go where it goes, and if it puts together pieces of things you already knew in ways that hadn't been thought about before, there's your creativity.
So let me just follow up on that. When you brought together those two lines of work, you wrote that for some reason a light came on and you were belatedly hooked on psychology. And I guess I'm kind of wondering, many of us can probably look back at our own work if we don't want to avoid that question and see all of the themes that actually drive it. but how do you find pride in your own work if you're constantly sort of identifying its derivations?
Well, I don't constantly identify its derivations. I don't sit and think about that particularly. But my own work is question posing and problem solving, and the process of trying to solve the problem, the process of collecting information that bears on the problem, finding out that maybe you guessed right, and then being able to write it up in a way that is interesting to other people. All of those are engaging parts of the process. I don't necessarily think I need to have come up with an idea for it to be a really, really useful idea. Selling the usefulness of an idea is a really important part of what we do. And it's maybe a part that we don't train students sufficiently fully in even realizing. So I could fairly easily point to a couple pieces of things that I've been interested in over the years that I sold a little bit, but didn't harp on endlessly enough for them to really become part of the conversation of the topic to which they pertain. And that was probably a mistake. You have to harp on it. You have to sell it. You think because you've published an article on this point, as nice as the point is, as earth-shaking as you think it might be, 75%, 80%, 90% of the people who might be able to make use of that idea or that information won't read it. They won't notice it, or they will notice it, but they won't absorb it until like the third article or the fourth article. It has to be pounded into people before it's going to have an impact.
So I'm going to switch a little bit and talk, shift a little bit towards some mentorship advice. So each generation of students faces an increasingly higher bar for admission to graduate school, getting postdocs, and getting jobs in the academic and non-academic market. And perhaps coincidentally, rates of anxiety and depression are pretty high amongst PhDs. So I was curious when I read in your biography for the APA award that you were described as having, quote, an undistinguished undergraduate record in which your mentors took chances on you for unknown reasons, since you, quote, continued to be a difficult student, not much interested in anything. It seems like you're off to a bit of a rocky start. What happened, and what kind of advice would you provide for students who might feel kind of similar?
Well, my first advice is don't do what I did. My second advice is if you're already doing what I did, be smarter about it than I was. When I was an undergraduate, I took a psychology course, I guess my freshman year, and transferred that year to another university where psychology was very, very dominated by learning and perception and sensation and that kind of stuff. It had so little to do with what I think of as human behavior, the department as a whole, that at some point my junior or senior year even, I asked an advisor if it would be possible to maybe create a blend of psychology and sociology that you might think of as social psychology. Mm-hmm. I'd never heard of social psychology. And being not very interested in conditioning at that time, or sensation perception ever, I was not a very good student. So if you can imagine, typically, when we look at students' grades, applicants to graduate school, their grade point in psychology is about a half a point higher than their overall grade point average. Mine was a half a point lower. So I had decent grades in everything but psychology. My psychology grades were totally undistinguished. I was not connected to any faculty member in the department. Basically everybody said, well, don't plan on graduate school because that's not going to happen. But then I got a 15, 16 on the GREs, and they changed their tune about whether it was possible. I was admitted to a graduate program probably as an experimental case, a test case, a pity case, I don't know. I've never actually asked my mentor at that time why he did such a ridiculous thing, but he admitted me to the graduate program where I continued to flounder because he was just beginning a program of work on childhood temperaments and how those are the foundation of personality. I happened to be in the same entering class with Robert Plomin, who became instantly interested in temperaments, and the department at Texas had also a very well-regarded behavior genetics program, and so Robert was interested in that as well, and he was often running to his career within about 2 months of beginning graduate school. I was not interested in either behavior genetics or temperaments at the time, although I'm interested in temperaments now, interestingly enough. And so I kind of, read around what other kinds of things might I be interested in. I had no background in personality, which was the program that I have been admitted to. And it was only my third year of graduate school where I bumped into self-awareness theory and control processes as a way of thinking about self-organized systems, that there was a spark of real interest. So back to what the question was what kind of advice would I give to students or postdocs? It's wonderful if you have something to be really interested in right off the bat. It's really terrific. But if you find yourself in a position where you like the process, you like the kind of sense of doing what you're doing, but you're not really all that inflamed with the concepts that you're working with, don't panic yet, because it can take years for you to settle into the realization that there is a topic that really draws you. I've had the good fortune of having maybe 4 or 5 such topics over the course of 40-some years of a career, and I think that's maybe a lot. It's not that unusual for people to struggle for a while and then find something that they're really fascinated with, and that's it. They work on that problem, that puzzle, that topic for the rest of their active career. It may take a while to find that thing. And I realize that it's a difficult position to be in, because at the time you're thinking, well, I'm not interested in the stuff that's in front of me. I'm not interested. Maybe this whole psychology thing is not for me. And I went through many months of wondering. I didn't really have another option. Otherwise, I probably would be a car mechanic or something like that right now. But I really didn't have another career option to think about except what I was in the middle of. But I did think about, gee, maybe I should be looking for other options because this is not working. And of course, one of the themes that underlies much of what I have to say about psychology is confidence is very, very important. And if you become sufficiently doubtful about being able to reach goals, then you give up and you quit and you go do something else. Well, I never quite got to that point. But there is an issue always when you're struggling with, can I do this or not? Is this going to work for me or not? Does this feel egocentric or not? There's always that question. If it's not, is it time to pull the plug and go do something else? And I wish that I had something sensible to say to you about how to know that the answer is no. Keep plugging along. Keep plugging along. Because sometimes the answer is, yeah, you're not really cut out for this. That's not a good thing to end on.
So you've seen probably many students go through, and given that you have you're an expert in personality theory, are there certain characteristics that you find tend to lead to a successful career in academia?
Well, I'm in a department that is kind of dominated by a clinical training program and has been for the time that I've been there. And they are an interesting group, clinical students, because many of them, not all of them, but many of them are constantly balancing these two possibilities, these two pathways that they might engage in, academic careers versus applied clinical careers. The people who wind up on academic paths, most fundamentally, have a characteristic that's captured in an article title that I pulled out of the Atlantic about 30 years ago and have been giving to graduate students ever since then. It was not about psychology, it was about sciences other than psychology. But the title of the article was The Rage to Know. If you have something inside that just cannot stand not to know the answers to questions, then academic career may be the right thing. If that's not there, it's very hard to make it work and feel good as a career path. I find that the students who are ultimately most successful are, again, not like me, students who are proactive, who are thinking 2 steps ahead of where they are right now, who you don't have to keep going to and saying, all right, you have to revise this manuscript that you've been sitting on for 2 months. It's time. That's not what produces successes. And if you find yourself, not you, because you guys are all past this, you're all very productive and hardworking and proactive. But if you ever have a mentee who can't seem to get past that step of having to be told what to do every step of the way, that's a red light. You have to watch out for that. One of the things that has surprised me, and yet I have no doubt that it's true over all these years, is how many people get into graduate programs who don't belong there, who struggle. It's an odd career. It's an odd pathway to make your living at. It takes a tremendous amount of inner direction to carry it off over multiple years. I'm not quite sure how I survived long enough to get into it seriously. But that's another story.
So if we could focus a little bit more on the concretes of what someone can do during their graduate career, how should they spend their time? And maybe it sounds like maybe a passionate question will come, a question that drives a need to know will come. Maybe it won't. Maybe it happens once or twice in a career, and to bide your time on the one hand. But if that's the place that you're in, that you aren't driven towards a specific question, what's the best way to spend your time in graduate school?
Being busy, doing things. In graduate school, how many of you are graduate students? Okay, in graduate school, one of your main tasks is to show that you can do stuff. I mean, it's about that simple. When you start applying for jobs, you're going to have a CV that lists what you have published or in press or made presentations about. Well, what's published or in press is your record of having done stuff. To some extent, it's less important what stuff you've done than being able to demonstrate that you're capable of doing stuff. If you haven't found the lodestar that's going to pull you for 15 years down a career path, do other things. Do things that your advisor is interested in. Be a willing participant in the teamwork of getting team papers done. Don't only do that. Keep reading things. Keep exploring. Put yourself on distribution lists for the journals that are relevant to your life so that you get a table of contents every month or every 2 months when the new issue comes out, and make yourself go through the titles and the abstracts to see if there's something there that is interesting or relevant to work that you are already engaged in or work that you might be interested in. Build yourself collections of articles that bear on particular topics that you're interested in. But that's the first step, is showing that you can do stuff. If you can't do stuff, you won't get a job interview. When I was in graduate school and finishing up with graduate school, it was it's not been the case, I don't think, that the job market has been getting steadily worse. It's bad now, but it was bad when I was in graduate school. It gets bad when a wave of people retire. I'm sorry, it gets good when a wave of people retire or die, and there are consequently jobs opening up. It gets bad when nobody's retiring, and we're in another one of those phases now where there's a lot of people who are old-ish but not old enough to push out the door quite yet. Where was I going with that? Oh, so I finished up in one of those troughs, and when I finished graduate school, I had like 2 publications, and I had 0, count them, 0 job interviews. I was fortunate enough to be able to acquire a 1-year postdoc that allowed me to survive. I got 2 more publications during that year, and a bunch of stuff in various stages of writing up. Well, with 4 publications, I was able to get 1, count them, 1 job interview. And in some measure, it was because nobody who was looking at these applications could tell that I was capable of producing anything. It took a few more years before that was there in the record. You don't want to be there. You don't want to be in that situation. So be busy in graduate school.
Okay, so let me shift back over to something I'm curious about, which is what drove you to do psychology, especially considering that it seemed like not the subject, especially considering what your undergraduate faculty mentors had said and stuff. Did you always know that that was the field that you wanted to go into?
No,
Did you...
no. My parents and I suppose I all believed that I was going to become some sort of a physical scientist until I took calculus. And when I took calculus, it became apparent that I was not going to become a physical scientist, that I was going to become something else. I found that first course that I took in psychology interesting, but not like it opened my eyes to my future. I thought it was interesting. I found literature more interesting than anything else. I thought reading novels was a great way to spend your time, and I still think reading novels is a great way to spend your time. But thank God I had the good sense to realize that it would be pretty stupid of me to think about literature as a career path. And it was pure dumb luck that put me into psychology. I applied only to personality programs, and I had no idea really what personality psychology was about. Dumb luck, pure dumb luck.
All right, so I think we're at time. I don't know if someone had I wish we had time for some burning questions from the audience.
Are there any burning questions?
One burning question.
One?
We can't see from down here, so we'd have no idea. Yeah.
Where is it?
Yell. It was a phantom hand. You don't have to have questions. It's okay if you don't have questions.
Okay, so I think this was really useful straight talk. Definitely a lot of straight talk.
If you want to talk to me more after this formally closes, I'm happy to hang around to do that.
Okay. All right, thank you very much. All right.